Today's story will give you a reason not to dance at weddings. In July 1518, a woman started dancing in the streets of Strasbourg, France. Then another woman joined her, and eventually 400 others would join her as well. This might sound like a wholesome and uplifting story of random dancing, but it was called the Dancing Plague. The group danced for days, then it turned into weeks. Magistrates and bishops would be called in to get the dancing to stop, but it continued throughout the night and into the next day for 60 days straight. Finally, doctors subdued the dancers and put them in hospitals for evaluation. Theories on what started the dancing range from demonic possession to overheated blood. Some think it was food poisoning and others say mass hysteria. We'll never know for sure, but at least now we'll have a reason for not dancing at weddings. Follow for more daily stories.
Have you heard the urban legend, "I told you so"? Alan Dirts was devastated when his wife left him for another man. Instead of getting mad, he decided to get even. 2 days later, the sheriff's department received a handwritten letter from Dirts stating his intent to sneak into the other man's bedroom at night and slit the throats of his wife and her lover. Dirts would never be caught, he bragged, because he would kill himself first. The cops raced over to the boyfriend's home and were relieved to find Dirts' wife and her lover alive. The two knew nothing about the threat and were visibly shaken by the news. The cops converged on the old Dirts place, but no one answered the door. Mrs. Dirts gave permission for a search, and they found her husband in the basement, hanging dead from the rafters. The scandal and suicide became the talk of the town, but at least a double murder was averted, or so they thought. A year later, Mrs. Dirts became Mrs. Edwards. It was a private ceremony with only close friends attending. So everyone was puzzled when a gift signed by Alan was found in the pile. The atmosphere soured as it was opened. It contained an expensive butcher knife. The next morning, the newlyweds were found dead in bed. Someone had sneaked inside and slit their throats while they slept. The only evidence was a note that read, "I told you so." The handwriting matched the letter sent by Dirts a year earlier.
This story is pretty disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. It comes from a police officer who made a post on Reddit. Dispatch received a call from an older couple saying there was an unknown man just standing in their backyard late one evening. He matched the description of a suspect who was recently involved in a gas station robbery just down the street about 2 hours previously. Several officers showed up and split into two groups on either side of the house. They approached the man with their weapons drawn. They saw the suspect and ordered him to get on the ground. The man ignored their commands and didn't move. As they approached him, they realized why he wasn't moving. The suspect, after robbing the gas station, took off on foot. He cut through the older couple's backyard to try to get away. When he went to hop the fence in the back, he slipped and impaled himself on a fence post. He couldn't pull himself off, and his body weight slowly drove him down the post. It entered from down below and went straight up through to his shoulder. He literally turned himself into a human scarecrow. Scariest Things Police Have Seen, Part 46. This was sent to me by a nephew of a trucker who had an encounter with a police officer. This trucker was driving on Highway 152 in California. He got pulled over by a highway patrol officer. It was odd though, because the police vehicle looked like an older 80s model unit. The officer gave him a ticket and left. Later on, the trucker went to the courthouse to fight the ticket. The judge looked at the ticket, got up and asked, "Do you think this is a joke?" The trucker said, "Why?" The judge told him that the officer's name and ID number used on the ticket belonged to an officer that had died on that freeway almost 40 years earlier.
Now tell me how this happened. You were snooping around somewhere you had no concern.
This is exactly why you should never mess with things you know nothing about. My friends is Papa Legba. Click the plus, drop a like, tag a friend, share with 3, or he might show up in your dreams tonight. He stands at a spiritual crossroads, connecting the human world to the dead. The one who allows you to speak with the dead or not. And if he says yes, it's usually for a price. It is also stated that he can speak all languages. He's also very prominent in Haitian voodoo. It's not something you should mess with. My question to you guys is, would you try and talk to him?
It's been kind of busy for me, so I'm just going to do one quick story celebrating my baby shower. just the bump. Clinton Road in West Milford, New Jersey is said to be the most haunted road in the United States. On Clinton Road, there's a place called Ghost Boy Bridge. It is said that if you travel down the road at midnight and stop at the bridge and then throw a coin to the river, the ghost boy that dwells below will throw it back at you.
Tell me about the scariest thing that has ever happened to you.
When I got my first apartment, my mom gave me this big armchair that she had had since she was in college. It's big and cozy, and I love reading in it. Still have it. It was around this time I started dating a guy from one of my classes. He started sleeping over in my apartment a lot because he was a commuter, and since I was so close to campus, it made sense that he could just wake up in the morning and go to class. But we started fighting. A lot. Whenever he was in my apartment, he would accuse me of moving his stuff around. He would complain that it was cold. He would just get really agitated. He had issues at the time that were outside of the apartment, but something about the apartment just seemed to make them worse. One night, we fell asleep together after a pretty bad argument. I woke up later and thought I was having a panic attack because I couldn't move. Then I looked over where my chair was. There was a little old man in his late 50s in a three-piece suit, sitting on my ottoman, just watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. He didn't have any ire directed at me. But what he did have was a very cold look towards my boyfriend. The ghost was not the dangerous thing. It was the person I was sleeping next to. I think the ghost was trying to get him to leave. The ghost was right.
Facts. Let's talk about a forest in France. I forget the name, but all of the trees are lined up in rows so that when the moonlight shines down, it creates a perfect path. One of my old camp counselors was stationed there in Vietnam, and he had to go from waypoint to waypoint to try and spot Vietnamese planes. Well, one night, something completely terrifying happened. He saw a little girl in a white dress, and no matter how hard he tried to run towards her, she always stayed the same distance away. He yelled at her and shouted at her, but she didn't respond. This is where it gets spooky. He fired his rifle into the air thinking it was a trap and warned her to go away or to declare herself. As the girl began to move towards him, her fingers elongated and her mouth opened like screams. He blacked out and woke up in the same spot. He wrote everything down in his journals, and years later, when he was having night terrors, his wife asked him. Part 2 is going to be up right away.
Tell me about a time when your child has told you that they've seen a spirit. I'll go first. When my daughter was 2 years old, I was in the kitchen cooking her dinner, and I asked her to go into the living room and get me something. She came flying back through from the living room, screaming and crying, shouting, "There's a man in the living room, there's a man in the living room." So I've gone running into the living room, spatula in hand, not really sure what that was going to do, but there was nobody in there. So I said to her, "Liberty, there's nobody in here, there's nobody in here." And she was like, "He's there in the corner," started pointing in the corner of the room. So I politely told them to go away. Later on that day, I took her round to my mum and dad's house, and just as she was only a couple of weeks old when my granddad, her great-granddad, was died. And I pulled a picture out and I showed it to her and I said, "Liberty, do you know who this man is?" And she got really scared and said, "That's the man that was in the living room today, Mummy." Your turn.
Short spooky story time, because I like the spooks even in the middle of the morning. Now, this happened many years ago with my ex-sister-in-law. We were out for the night having fun. She doesn't have the best directional sense and we ended up getting lost. We were somewhere in the outskirts of Tacoma. That's all I really remember. I just remember there being a couple of little gas stations and some cute little stores. As we were driving, we pulled over one last time to gas up and get some snack. And of course asked for directions because she was directionally challenged. As was I before the GPS was created. So as we were driving, the guy says, "Be careful out there, girls." That's some horror movie ass shit, right? We're all like, "We will, sir, we will." As we were driving the road that he told us to take, we noticed that there were two disturbingly tall figures at the edge of the road, like in a fucking horror movie. They go to the side of the road, and we slow down to make sure that, they're okay. There's part 2 of the Shadow Man. So the last story, we were driving through a small town in Tacoma. Late at night, didn't know where the hell we were going. We suddenly saw two disturbingly tall creatures, peoples, I don't know. She slowed down and she was scared shitless, I'm not gonna lie. We both looked at each other and we just got chills. Now her and I both believe in the paranormal and we also are not slow on that. We looked at each other and we're like, that's some motherfucking ghosts. But of course we weren't certain, so she slowed down and put on her high beams. The shadows then quickly went to the side of the road, weirdly enough. And as we drove by, I remember her rolling down my window and she literally yelled, "Hey, you guys need some help?" I just looked at her like, bitch, that's a ghost. And of course, it was on my side of the car, so I look at them. And two silent shadow figures just stare at us like this. Part 3. So, we don't get a response because these things are just standing there looking at us. And we get scared. We roll up the windows. And she freaking floors it. I'm telling her, slow your ass down, calm down. I'm looking in the rearview mirror, and they're just standing in the middle of the road, silently staring at us. Now, mind you, we never saw a face. It was like two really tall, like over 6 feet black shadowed men, creatures, beings, I don't know. So they didn't follow us. It wasn't like that at all. They just sat there in the middle of the road until I couldn't see them anymore. We finally made it to town, and we just laughed our asses off of how fucking scary the whole thing was. I have more shadow people, men, creatures, stories. Probably we'll do another one soon if you're interested.